Today's ceremony, however, has very special meaning because today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people.
Now, you may have heard that line uttered by the incomparable Tom Hardy, but forget that.
We take Gotham from the corrupt, and we give it back to you, the people.
I said forget it. What Trump taps into here is actually very important.
For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land.
What Trump is saying here is absolutely correct. While the United States remains the most prosperous state in the history of the world, income inequality is beginning to reach uncharted territory. And while the country is more powerful than any other in history, the power of the people within the country has diminished greatly. So much so that work by Martin Gillens of Princeton University and others has shown that the people no longer exert any real influence in Washington. As he wrote in a headline-grabbing article back in 2014, in the United States, our findings indicate the majority does not rule, at least not in the causal sense of actually determining policy outcomes. So not only is Trump successfully tapping into populist anger expressed by many of his supporters, their instincts are backed by facts, careful study, and research. Americans are losing. They're losing their income share in the economy and their political power. In this video, I'm going to focus on just one issue of note from his speech, education, as an example of how seriously he's taking his promises for the country. I freely admit that, in general, Trump's diagnosis is correct. But what about his prescription?
What truly matters is not which party controls our government, but whether our government is controlled by the people. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
These are great words, true words. I may not care for Donald Trump, but I'm glad that he spoke these words, even if he didn't write them. Not that it matters, but no, he almost certainly didn't write them. CNN reported on Inauguration Day that two senior Trump officials had told them that Donald is writing his speech himself. If you don't believe them because they're fake news, then let me point out that Trump also tweeted that he's writing his inaugural address, accompanied with this picture of himself pretending to write with what appears to be a Sharpie. It's since been reported by the Wall Street Journal, The Hill, and Politico that, of course, he didn't write his speech alone in what looks to be one of Saddam Hussein's palaces. His speech was largely written by Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, but don't worry about all that. People don't write their own speeches by themselves. For some reason, the Trumps like to claim that they write their own speeches and then backpedal on that when, say, they're caught plagiarizing the DNC speech of Michelle Obama.
You work hard for what you want in life.
That you work hard for what you want in life.
That your word is your bond, that you do what you say you're going to do.
That your word is your bond.
We want our children and all children in this nation to know that the only limit to the height of your achievements is the reach of your dreams and your willingness to work hard for them.
But seriously, it doesn't matter that he didn't write his speech. After all, he was right when he said those words. Again, probably not personally written by himself.
We will no longer accept politicians who are all talk and no action, constantly complaining, but never doing anything about it. The time for empty talk is over. Now arrives the hour of action.
So let's talk about action. Obviously, I can't investigate all of the broad themes Trump talks about in his inauguration speech, but let's take a look at just one area I was delighted to see him address: education.
Americans want great schools for their children, safe neighborhoods for their families, and good jobs for themselves. These are just and reasonable demands of righteous people and a righteous public. But for too many of our citizens, a different reality exists. An education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge.
So Americans want great schools for their children, the education system has lots of money, but the students aren't doing well. This is more or less true. I don't think I need to support the claim that Americans want to get great schools for their children. That seems to be a safe assumption. In terms of funding, Finland spends about $12,500 per lower secondary school student, and the US spent about the same. In secondary and primary education, the US actually spends a little more per student, and the outcomes couldn't be further separated. Finland is consistently ranked as one of the best education systems in the world, here ranked at number 6 in 2015 for 15-year-olds math and science, the highest outside of East Asia, and the US was ranked down at number 29. Here in reading, math, and science, Finland is ranked at number 2, with the US down at number 14 overall amongst OECD countries in 2010. So Trump's diagnosis here is largely correct. And don't take that from him. He's good at recognizing problems. That's an important skill for governing. It's also an essential skill for coming up with cute nicknames like Crooked Hillary, Lying Ted, Little Marco, or Fat Loser. America is failing to spend its money properly when it comes to education. So what's Trump's solution? One might expect he would look to Finland or East Asian countries to find out how to make better use of the budget that exists. Perhaps bring in the greatest minds in educational theories to lead the US Department of Education. Well, that's not exactly Trump's plan. His website actually highlights what he's planning to do with education policy, so let's take a look. It's pretty clear that he wants to focus on school choice, which is basically a gateway to privatization. Rather than improve public schools, he wants to create a voucher system, which basically means that a portion of the budget assigned to the education system will be taken out of services and put into profit for private corporations. You won't be surprised to learn that this is not the system Finland used to improve its educational outcomes. Trump has also nominated this person, Betsy Devos, as the Secretary of Education. She is, of course, an outspoken advocate of school choice and voucher programs and has essentially no experience with the public school system. And as Al Franken's questioning at her confirmation hearing seems to suggest, she has very little understanding of the actual issues concerning education today.
I would like your views on the relative advantage of doing assessments and using them to measure proficiency or to measure growth.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think if I'm understanding your question correctly around proficiency, I would also correlate it to competency and mastery, so that each student is measured according to the advancement that they're making in each subject area.
Well, that's growth. That's not proficiency. So in other words, the growth they're making is in growth. The proficiency is an arbitrary standard.
If they've reached a level, the proficiency is if they've reached a like third grade level for reading, etc.
No, I'm talking about the debate between proficiency and growth.
Yes.
And what your thoughts are on them.
Well, I was just asking to clarify then.
Well, this is a subject that has been debated in the education community for years. And I've advocated growth, as the chairman and every member of this committee knows, because with proficiency, teachers ignore the kids at the top who are not going to fall below proficiency, and they ignore the kid at the bottom who, no matter what they do, will never get to proficiency. So I've been an advocate of growth. But it surprises me that you don't know this issue. And, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a good reason for us to have more questions. I was kind of surprised, well, I'm not that surprised, that you did not know this issue.
So rather than deal seriously with education, Trump has chosen a policy of divestment from the public school system and an appointee who is quite obviously intellectually incurious about the issues surrounding the field. Trump claims to care about education. He seems to understand at least the broad strokes of what's going wrong in the education system. He also says this:
I will fight for you with every breath in my body, and I will never, ever let you down.
But sadly, he already has. It's one thing to point out the problems with the American government. Any idiot can do that. But problems demand solutions, not just any old change, but serious solutions. Ones that have been tested and have succeeded elsewhere, or are at the very least regarded as reasonable by the majority of experts. His disingenuous approach to education is merely one example, a synecdoche of a broader lack of respect for expertise, a lack of seriousness, and a lack of curiosity. And frankly, I worry that the mainstream media and the American people, who must hold him accountable, may suffer from the same failings. It's quite easy to agree with him as he points out obvious problems. It's easy to feel angry and agree with his diagnoses. But we can't stop there, because the more important question when it comes to political issues will always be, what about his prescription?